Hey guys,
Welcome.
it is Scotch for Dummies.
4 guys in the Scotch journey, or 3 guys tonight, a Scotch journey to help you with your next Scotch purchase. Happy Sunday, gentlemen.
Happy Sunday, and it's a good Sunday. We've got a heck of a topic.
We've got a bar. Look at this stuff.
Great whiskey and a cool special guest. I'm excited to bring him on.
Yep.
But before we get to it, I would say
We need to pour
cheers.
something
We
in
need
here.
to pour something to get this conversation started. So if you're not familiar with what's going to happen, we actually have a special guest today from Compass Box, a whiskey maker, someone that is in tune with blending different whiskeys and putting some very good stuff out. And we're going to start with the artist blend.
So, Mark, this week, speaking of subject, we just put out a Compass Box for Dummies video that you put out, which is really informative. And I thought the best thing to complement that was obviously to bring an expert to talk about it some more.
Someone who actually played a part in making some of these whiskeys.
He probably should have been on your show, but that's okay.
No, we wanted to be unbiased and give people information about who Compass Box is and what they do and what their core range is. And I mean, that's what the beginner's guide is about. So I hope it's being well received. It's fun to make. I actually learn a lot researching it too. You know, we do. So, but we've got some 6 core range that we're going to really focus on with our guest here. We might get into some of these other things. We do have some pre-populated questions from our patrons that they submitted.
Yep.
We've got some questions that we want to hit this guy
It's gonna be a
with.
good show.
But we're also taking questions from you on the comments. So Drew's watching comments, and we'll work them in as we can. But let's get to
Let's do this.
the guest. Let me take a quick sip.
All right. Let's welcome in our guest today from Compass Box.
From Compass Box, James Saxon, whiskey maker from Compass Box. Good evening, sir.
Cheers.
I think it's 8 o'clock your time.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys. Yeah, thanks for having me. It is indeed evening, but good afternoon to you all and everyone watching.
Are you joining us with a Compass Box, I hope?
Well, you found me out. No, yeah, I am. We've got 2 of our brilliant core range in front of me that I'm hoping to talk you through, and as well your viewers. We have Artist Blend. You've got yours poured already. I have mine. I think it's a great opportunity to talk about these 2 whiskies, which have been in the portfolio for a little while, but they've been given a bit of a refresh. So always good to talk about what makes these particularly exciting and why the change.
So we'll dive into those 2 whiskeys after we find out a little bit about James. Why you've been with Compass Box since 2019? I think
That's correct, Mark. Yes, I've been with the company for just over 2.5 years. Obviously, 4 months of that was in the very strange twilight zone of COVID, but we came out the other side, and looking forward to putting a lot more exciting blends out there, getting the tarmac back on the road as well.
So, did you start as a whiskey maker, or how did you start with Compass Box?
Yeah, I came in as a Compass Box whiskey maker. That was I was assistant whiskey maker first, and then over time, I started to get a little bit more responsibility. And yeah, just about summer last year, the promotion happened, so the assistant came off, and now I'm just a full whiskey maker.
whiskey
Wow,
maker.
congratulations.
Right. So you actually, you didn't come straight off the street. You've got whiskey experience from the industry. You came from another company where you were in charge of, I want to say their blending room maybe, or something of that nature. I don't know the exact title, but so you had some experience coming into Compass Box. And you actually came from that company where you are involved with some whiskey industry experience at the old course, right?
True, yeah, 100%. So when I was studying for my degree in St. Andrews, obviously steeped in 2 things, golf and whiskey. So it was a great place to study. It was a great place to work as well. So many knowledgeable people coming through. We had a great bar stocked with, well, I think the USP at the time I was there, we tried to have a bottle from every distillery in Scotland, open and closed. So lots of us had more, but we tried to have a really comprehensive selection. And then, yeah, you're right. I left university. I started a job working in the Middle East, helping to promote some of the brands for this much bigger Scotch whisky company. Then I switched across to their blending facility in Scotland. So that's where I kind of learnt a lot of what I put into practice now. But yeah, I was part of their sample room team, so I wasn't in charge of anything at all, bar maybe the teas mid-afternoon. It was a very important part of the working day, though.
But so when you were at school, when you were at university, did you plan on landing in the whiskey industry? Is this where you thought you were going to end up? Is it what you studied, or was one of those things where you learned that, hey, I'm really passionate about and interested in this, and this is what I really want to do?
It was definitely that. I think the moment I got into whiskey, I wondered whether it would be possible to forge a career in it, because there's so many different things to do in whiskey, more than I could have realized starting out. So I didn't know I would get to this position at the time I've done. But when John came to our Whiskey Society during my studies, this was a company that I wanted to be involved with somehow. And it was really exciting to then obviously get the opportunity to come and do something like create whiskeys. It's such an honor for a company that so many people have so many really fond memories of and so many nice things to say about.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm a little envious. I mean, you've got a dream job. But let's dive into the whiskeys. Let's talk about these two, because like you said, they did go through a little bit of I don't want to say a remake, because it is technically the same whiskey, right? But the labelings have changed, and these are on the shelves now. We have seen these here in the States. I've seen them in a couple places in a couple different states, so I can tell you they're getting out there. But why go through it? What was the thinking behind that? Because that's going to cause some controversy. People are going to say it's different whiskey.
Absolutely. We wanted to make them more compass box, basically. If you remember the old labels, they were similar colors. So you had, it wasn't quite as light for Artist Blend. It was more of a yellowy color for the old version. Yeah. And then again, it was a case of we've lightened them up a little bit. Glasgow Blend was a really deep red, but you really had to look hard to know that they were from compass box. And then you had this great King Street right there in the middle of the label, which a lot of people just assumed that was the name of both whiskeys. So you had the same named whiskey, different colors, different whiskeys, more confusion potentially. So we wanted to streamline that message. From the very beginning, it was Great King Street Artist Blend and Great King Street Glasgow Blend. But we thought, well, we're no longer based on Great King Street in Edinburgh. That's where the name came from. That was our registered address. We've moved house, so maybe it's an opportunity to take that off and just give them their own identities of Artist Blend and Glasgow Blend. We also felt there was a great opportunity to tell a really great story about blending in Scotland and within Scotch whisky generally. As we'll talk about, these are two such different styles of whisky. They really do different things. They speak of different processes, different flavors. And so we wanted to tie them to Edinburgh in the case of Artist Blend, and Glasgow Blend, obviously, in the case of Glasgow Blend, more explicitly.
Well, before we get into those details, I do want to have a quick shout out to our good patron, good friend, Tom R. As a Compass Box fanboy, this is a very special day. Thank you, James, for coming into our whiskey community and sharing your knowledge. Well, thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Tom does have some questions that he submitted, so we'll get to those at some point during the conversation.
I thought it was just going to be praise, but that's my name.
Very appreciative. So what we want to talk about?
Let's start with the Artist Blend. Yeah. So what is kind of your process of putting together this Artist Blend? It's an established whiskey already. So when you are going into making another batch, what is your process of creating Artist Blend itself?
Such a good question, Andrew, because you're right. We have a range of whiskeys now, all of which you've got in front of you there. And despite the fact that they are core range and they're available most places, most of the year, every time we come to do a new vatting, as we call it, every time we need to create a new batch, the process starts anew. And we might have a recipe in mind. So Artist Blend, we're looking at about 55% malt whiskey to 45% grain whiskey. We know we want to get fruity, sort of estery, delicate flavors coming through from the malts and that pillowy, creamy softness from the grain whiskey. But depending on what we have available, we'll have to tweak, we'll have to flex. This is the challenge, but also the opportunity of being a blender. We're whiskey makers because we put a little bit more of a spin on how can we create our own style from different casks, different distilleries, different transparency levels. All of this we see as being the part of the whiskey maker. But for Artist Blend, we might start with a recipe, but what goes into the bottle may have to change, may have to flex, as I said. So you're right, we do have the same labels, the different labels, I should say. And sometimes it's a tough challenge to get people to believe it's the same whiskey. But actually for us, batch to batch, you will get differences. And we're all about talking about those. So if you pick up a bottle of Artist Blend or Glasgow Blend, or for that matter, any of our whiskies, and you look at the batch code either printed on the back label or just lasered into the foot, and you get in touch with us and say, what is in this bottle? We can tell you. And it might actually be a different recipe to what you've had before.
Interesting.
The beauty of blending, though, is that you can bring different things together to create the same style and the same effect.
So with that, do you have like a gallon jug of the first making of artist blend to keep consistency, or do you let it migrate over time as it ages, as you change it and get new vattings?
Great question. Really great question. So what we have are what we call benchmark target bottlings. Okay. So we'll have a batch that we felt was particularly delicious. That we'll go to for the subsequent batches.
Okay. So you'll keep that as a reference, kind of a reference standard.
So when you do that, though, are you using technology, or are you using your palate and nose, or both? In other words, do you use chemical makeup?
We don't. We always rely on our nose and palates for that. So
interesting.
A lot of this is quite subjective, but again, we love consistency. We want to be consistently delicious, but we're a big believer in trying to improve our whiskies and trying to play different themes and variations on them. So for us to be able to match GCMS printout for this particular batch is less important than, well, has it moved the needle some way, or is it still as delicious as we want it to be? Ultimately, that's the question we need to answer.
Okay.
Interesting.
Wow, that's interesting. So let's get back to these two bottles. The major difference, though, we've got Edinburgh, which is the artist, right? And then when we move over to the Glasgow blend, what's different about it? There's a really big difference. It's got peat, right? It's a peat with, that's the big one.
Slightly.
But what else is different about it? Actually, it's the maturation. I believe this is a sherry finished bottle, right?
So there's a lot of differences with these two, and it all stems from a historical reference. There's a great book, very small book, so it won't take you too long to read if you know you're into this kind of thing. But I think Whisky by Aeneas MacDonald is really the forefront or the beginning of this story. He talked about blended Scotch whisky at the turn of the 20th century and how, depending on where you went in the United Kingdom, different groups of drinkers in different cities preferred different styles of whisky. And it's a really interesting thing. You talk about terroir in wine these days, and sometimes recently in whiskey. But back in the day, you had different tastes spread around. And I know it's the same in the US with, you know, do you like a New York pizza? Are you more into Chicago? Is it maybe an LA thing? So I really see a common thread here. Depending on where you are, depending on the conditions, the culture, your drink is going to say something about you, and it needs to deliver something for you. So Aeneas MacDonald said that the Glaswegians liked the richest, the most full-bodied whiskies of any drinkers in the UK. Edinburgh was next, so we still had to have plenty of flavor and punch in artist blend. But for Glasgow blend, yeah, we were just going right the way to sherry casks, right the way to smoke. The recipe-wise, we do use sherry casks. So we use sherry casks that we've either sourced ourselves, or we use stocks of whiskey which have been maturing fully in sherry casks. And it'll be around about 35% of the recipe will be coming from a Highland malt whiskey, aged fully in or sometimes finished in, depending on availability, Oloroso sherry. So that is a big, big part of this. And you can see that from the color.
Right.
Something that I know will have been talked about before with Compass Boxes. We like to make sure color is natural. We don't have any artificial coloring. We don't chill filter. So when you look at this Glasgow blend, what you're seeing is entirely the result of the maturation. But yes, the sherry casks will be leading that beautiful, rich orange hue. But a big part of that is the smoke as well. So we sourced that from Williamson Distillery. So that's what the paperwork says, but I'm sure you can work out which one that is. But yeah, the two together, the sherry and the smoke, just makes such a really, it's a bonanza of flavor. It really is. And very true to the boldness of Glasgow itself.
So,
very nice.
And knowing that there's variations, right? So your vattings, because you got to keep creating it, and there might be variations in the recipe. And knowing that you guys are very adamant about non-chill filtration and non-added coloring, you actually celebrate the fact that the coloring. If I were to see an old bottle of Glasgow blend sitting next to a new one, there may very well be a slight difference in the coloring, and you're fine with that. You're okay with that, because other distilleries that use coloring, they're completely afraid of that. They're afraid that if a customer sees two bottles sitting next to each other on the shelf and they aren't the same color, that obviously one of them is bad.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, having worked for a few different companies, The color generally doesn't vary a huge amount. Like if it did, that would be a problem, and you would look at that, a lot very closely. But I think there is a whiskey color that a lot of people expect, and some of ours, like Artist Blend, is maybe lighter than a lot of whiskey consumers are used to. But we think it's if people ever were to see, as you suggested, one bottle this color, another bottle that color, I think that's an opportunity for a conversation. And we have the time to do that. And if someone's interested and wants to reach out, wherever that bottle happens to have been sold, and we have great partners all around the world who almost hand sell our whiskies. And if a customer comes in and they're a little bit confused about the color, that person running that store or bar can go back to us, and we can get an answer to that person very, very quickly. So we think it's always an opportunity to educate. There's a lot that goes into Compass Box whiskies. There's a lot to say, a lot of process, a lot of fun as well. And we think that we're not afraid of that. We want to have those conversations if they arise.
So these are the latest two to go through any kind of, let's say, change. And it was really more or less labeling and marketing change. But we've got 4 other bottles that are actually core. This is really just the core. These ones all fall into the limited range, and some are out there, some are not. Some you were actually involved with. I think you had a hand in the Arcana, right? And maybe the Menagerie. But the other 4 core ranges, they're out there all the time and expect to be for quite some time, right?
Sure, yeah. When it comes to the likes of Hedonism, we almost look at that as a core range limited edition, because I talked about each batch, we need to sample all these casks. And to give you some perspective on how special Hedonism is, first of all, it was the first whiskey John released when he started the company, just 2 casks. If it was still just 2 casks per batch, my job would be a lot easier. It's not. There's a lot more that goes into it than that.
Oh.
But when we are looking for samples for Hedonism, we are putting out a request to our supply partners for very specific whiskies, grain whiskies aging for anywhere between 15 and 25 years. We want them to be from first fill barrels or recharred hogsheads.
Makes sense, yeah.
Even then, I get 250 samples in. I know that only 1 in 3 is going to be good enough.
Wow.
So we're already starting with a very high quality of liquid. Whiskies aged in fresh casks from distilleries that we've used before and that have got great age behind them. But some might have a bit of prickle on the palate, which just gets in the way of that soft creaminess, which is so important to hedonism. Others, there might be some other things going on with the maturation that's not quite there yet. But 1 in 3 of the samples I taste is actually good enough. So there's a lot of effort that goes into hedonism.
Interesting.
So you taste a lot of whiskey every day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I can't help but smile. It's one of the best parts of my job. But the palate does get quite tired after a while.
Yeah, I was wondering. Sure. So how do you manage it? How do you manage doing your job all day, 5 days a week or however often, and not like burn out your palate?
So we try and space out our vatting. So I'm not tasting from dawn till dusk for the whole of the year. There'll be quieter periods where we're maybe focusing on a limited edition, or maybe it's just cask trials that I'm managing. So we try and make sure that our core product vattings, they have a lot of time in between them. And yes, we're talking about, hedonism is the most, about 200, 250 cask samples. Something like Spice Tree, we might see 140, 150. It's just about tasting those consistently throughout the day. I find I'm a little bit better in the morning, so I try and get maybe a few blocks of, let's say, 15 samples, maybe do that 3 times in the morning. Might have space for a block of 15 in the afternoon, who knows? But give myself like 10 days, and yeah, we end up happy. You're
probably going to ask this. So my question was, when you do this point, do you bring the ABV down quite a bit to get more flavors? And what's your kind of approach to doing that?
Yes.
Yeah, so this varies depending on the company. So where I used to work, we would always bring it down to 20% ABV, but that's because we were almost exclusively nosing the whiskey. A Compass Box, when we do want that mouthfeel, and hedonism is such a brilliant example of that. You want that luscious, soft, creamy sweetness going on, and you want it to really last on the palate. You want it to flow like I don't know if anyone out there is in the habit of, tasting silk satin cushions, but that's kind of what we're going for. Even if you've not, I'm sure you can think about it, you can imagine it. So we want that mouthfeel to be there. So that's why we put such an onus on tasting. But yeah, we have that roundabout, whatever the strength it will be bottled at. So for Hedonism, for example, we try and bring it down to about 43. If it's one of our limited editions, we'll be looking at about 46. We've got a new release of our No Name series coming up. That's 48.9% ABV. So whatever the ABV of the final bottling is, whatever the end customer will be tasting, that's what we try and bring it down to.
That's really
that's
different. Yeah.
So we just finished up, we mentioned to you earlier in our pre-show with you, a do-it-yourself blend off with our patrons, which was marvelous. It was phenomenal. We ended up having a family, husband and wife finale. But through that whole process, we definitely discovered kind of some interesting thoughts and things, how they progress. And to the point of when they mixed, et cetera, when you water it down that much, is there a big difference from getting the flavors and nuances versus doing it at the normal ABV, or does things change when you bring it back up? I mean, how does it work itself out? Because when they were doing it obviously pure blending for what they had. So they had to go off what they did. And it was interesting, and it changed a little bit from what they sent us.
It did.
Right.
So they would blend it one day, taste it, think it tasted great, and then a week later go back and not completely changed, but it changed dramatically. Yeah. How do you manage
those things? Have to just be like evolving for you constantly.
Yeah, so it's a really tough one, and it's a very good point, especially I think blending at cask strength. We don't do it very often because we feel as whiskey makers the bottling strength is actually our final flourish. It's the final quality check, if you like, where we say this for us is the strength at which this whiskey performs best straight out of the bottle. Our motto is share and enjoy. And for us, and for me especially, I find I drink way more whiskey between 40 and 50% ABV than above that. I do drink whiskeys at higher ABVs. I buy bottles at higher ABVs, but I find so often I'm just bringing it down into that drinker's strength range, if you like. And when it comes to, I think there's two questions there. So it's how does things change, one strength to another, and then how do blends change as you keep them in a bottle and revisit them? And the first one, because we're tasting the cask samples at that drinker's strength ABV, we know that if we're happy with it at that ABV, then the person who's buying it at the end of the day should be happy too. Yeah. If we were to just blend at cask strength, there would be a little bit of a hit and hope situation of, this is okay once it's 86 proof, we don't want to be in that position. But when it comes to the prototypes, which is what we call our preliminary blends, as we're working our way through a project, both for the limited editions, which are on the right-hand side of your screen, and the core range, we go through prototyping for all of them to make sure that the recipe is correct. For all of those, we will leave them at least 24 hours. I will blend them up. I will add the water. They will go into a little 100 milliliter, sample bottle, and they will sit there in our temperature-controlled room until we're ready to taste it the next day. And as I say, that will be a minimum of 24 hours later. So everything is knitted together. There isn't going to be too much that's going to change.
So once you've bottled it, you don't expect there to be any more change. It should be, this has gone into the bottle. This is done going through its metamorphosis, if you will, and you expect it to have this flavor and nose, and you're not worried about that.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because if you talk to John about this, he will give you many examples. We think there is something called bottle shock. So whiskey, even though it's maybe doesn't have as many organic compounds as wine, for example. So wine does age in the bottle. I'm not here saying that whiskey ages in the bottle like wine does, but there are changes. There is a marrying, there's a settling that takes place. I think whiskey finds being bottled a bit traumatic, and so would I, being in a vat, extruded through these pipes, put into a bottle with all this water, jostled around.
It's alive.
Whiskey when it's bottled. It's a traumatic experience. So once that whiskey is actually spent 2 to 3 weeks, or sometimes even longer, it depends on the style of whiskey. But there's a couple where actually we've tasted it a month after bottling, like, this isn't the whiskey we thought it was going to be. But back to it a couple of weeks after that, a couple of months after that, and suddenly, wow, this is what we remember from our blending rooms.
I see.
It can be a thing, and it affects more certain whiskeys in different ways.
So you you create these small samples, you get those right, and then you create the big vat, and immediately the big vat isn't right. But if you give it time, it'll return to what the sample was because it has the time to work through that. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay.
So you should try that at work. You know, he makes pharmaceuticals.
We're not, I mean, we have a strict shelf life on ours.
I'm gonna pull that up because it actually does kind of merit to this question. Are certain cask types that may change more than others?
So that's a good question. My experience on this is still growing. I'm still trying to understand, but I know with Rogue's Banquet, that was one that I worked on last year. And when that came out, we were really keen to open it because it was our first 20th anniversary whiskey, you know, and we were keen to start tasting it and celebrating even in the minor way that was possible for us during our first national lockdown here in the UK. But we were tasting it and we were like, well, everything's there, but it's not really in the right relationship yet. There's not a gelling. But we did towards the end of the year, we organized with one of our first ever retail partner here in the UK. We organized a virtual tasting. And they sent packs all around the world. We had people joining us from the US, from other parts of the EU, and all around the UK too. And preparing the whiskeys for that, we put Rogue's Banquet into one of those packs, and I was like, oh my god, we did 14 whiskeys from across the Compass Box back catalogue, and I thought Rogue's Banquet was one of the best performing. So yeah, it just needed a little bit more time in its shell before it could emerge victorious.
Interesting.
That's amazing. So it's so much of an art. I mean,
it really is.
You have to put it together. You have to wait on it. You got to, taste some in the morning. You got to taste some in the afternoon. It is truly.
If you need help, let me know.
Yeah, if you need some of those sample packs.
Yeah, it's like an extra layer of quality control, isn't it? It's like
that's right.
I'll also send you 1 month after the bottling. Are we good to go? No. Hold on to it a little bit longer. I'll keep tasting it.
or add extra variables to it. Ship it over in the air versus airplane.
Right.
The 24 hours versus 1 week. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Well, it's tough to get hold of shipping containers these days, let me tell you.
I bet it is.
Do we have some patron comments?
We do. Let's pull some
We do
up
have some
quick.
questions that were sent in from the patrons that we want to make sure we get to. So I'm going to leave it to you, Drew, to pick who, what, when. Give the credit due.
Okay, sure. Let me. So you want to start with Chad?
Yeah,
sure. So Chad Anderson, one of our patrons, says, I have a great picture from Victoria Whiskey Festival that shows John Glazier in a deep conversation with 40 Creek founder John Hall. This got me thinking, has Compass Box ever experienced with Canadian whiskey, or have any barrels of Canadian whiskey at hand?
So is Compass Box involved with Canadian whiskey?
Well, hello, Chad. Thanks for coming out and seeing us on the road. That probably was a little while ago, unfortunately. But yeah, John has so many great connections across the whiskey world. I can't say that there is anything with Canadian whiskey in the pipeline currently, but I do have real fondness for Canadian whiskey. I think certainly some of their blends just have such a wonderful sweetness to them, such a great texture as well. So if Canadian whiskey came across my front door, I would definitely be keen to experiment, because that's what whiskey making is all about at the end of the day. And I'm sure as your Patreon supporters found as well when they were blending, it's just such fun. It's a really playful, creative space in which to work.
It is.
And whiskeys all around the world, different processes, they bring different things to a blend. For Compass Box, nothing is off the table.
That was one of the things that I saw with the blends we got. So we all have different palates. I'm a peat, heavy, rich sherry head. And these guys are more sherry heads. But what I found was some of these other whiskey tubers or whatever, they have very different palates. And so they would blend something that was really subtle and really delicate. And it was an exquisite blend, but it's hard to compare against like this heavily sherried sherry bomb. So you put them side by side in a random drawing, you're like, oh my gosh, how do you even compare those? It's almost not fair. Yeah.
Quite interesting.
It's so true. And that's why I don't want to give the impression that I'm the only one creating whiskeys at Compass Box. We are a team. There's 4 of us that taste together. I can make something that really works for me. So I am a little bit more in that more subtle whiskey, little hints of this and that. And there'll be other people who maybe want me to dial things up sometimes. Or there'll be some times when I get to the peat whiskeys and I go, we want more of this. And someone's like, no, we're good where we are. Let's dial it back. So it's a negotiation. It's a conversation. And I think that's part of the creative process too, that maybe doesn't always get talked about. My name is on the back of, as you say, Arcana, and it's on the back of Menagerie. But, there's 4 voices all having a negotiation and all putting their points across. And ultimately, it's about what do we think the person who appreciates Compass Box, the person who's been following us maybe for the whole 21 years, what are they going to think? And is this going to work for them? So really complex. You can't do a focus group for every whiskey, and nor would we want to. But we are mindful that for all we do lots of different whiskeys, there is something about Compass Box which always needs to be there. And I think it is a certain fullness and sweetness and richness and ultimately deliciousness. And Scotch whiskey has such a broad spectrum of flavor that you can bring deliciousness in wherever you are on that line. And that's our ultimate job.
Yep, absolutely. So I have a question for you. So in particular, when you're in this creative zone, right, you and the others, you're trying to create the next blend, whatever it is, do you go for profiles like, hey, we've done enough peat for a while, let's go to the sherry flavor? Do you kind of have a profile in mind, or is it more of what stock do we have, or is there other things that kind of come into play in that ingredients or format?
Great question, Drew. And it's a little bit of all of them, which is going to sound strange, but it all starts with the whiskey. My job is fundamentally to take deliveries from warehouses all across Scotland, and I am looking for the best. I'm looking for parcels that excite me, parcels that intrigue me. And then realistically, the next stage of the process is how can we create these, how can we give these extra personality, extra dimension? So when I'm making whiskies, I always have this star parcel. Could be 1 cask, it could be 10, it doesn't really matter. But how do we celebrate that, but twist it, but add something to it? It's a bit like, customizing, accessorizing, adding little bits which just enhance the overall beauty. I'm big into music. So for me, it's like, how can we get the mix right? Do we need a little bit more bass? Do we need a little bit more hi-hat? What is it that is going to make this
speaking of language,
right? So well, let me ask you that. When you get some of these samples, might there be one that does intrigue you, that does excite you, but you don't have a place for it yet, but you still are going to take that parcel? I'm gonna pick this parcel up because this is going to be somewhere in the future because it excited me, but I don't know where I'm going to fit it into a puzzle just yet. Do you do a lot of that too?
Yes. So once we found that parcel, we're like a dog with a bone. We don't want to get rid of it under any circumstances. So if you're right, if it's a really great parcel of Lefroy, for example, but we've already done 3 heavily peated or slightly peaty limited releases over the last 18 months, it's like, well, maybe we'll shelve this for now. We'll work on the recipe. We'll get to something we're excited about, but we'll dial it into the future. We'll put something, a little place marker for maybe 6 months' time, when maybe people are ready for peat from Compass Box again. Although people should always be ready for peat from Compass Box.
They are.
Exactly.
They are.
We get a lot of love about Glasgow blend and Peat Monster. Whiskey Advocate putting it, I think, number 9 in their top 20 whiskies last year. So people love peat from us. But yeah, we do have to think about, well, what stories can we tell with releases overall? We'd like to release 2 fairly close together, not exactly at the same time. So we don't want them to compete. We don't want it to be an overload. So we do think about when we're going to release them too. But always it starts with the whiskey.
Yep. I think it's interesting how you have something you're like, ooh, that's really good, but I'm not ready for it yet. I do a lot of design work and musician myself, and sometimes creativity needs to kind of be there, but it has to evolve and wait for the right opportunity. And speaking to your music metaphor earlier, I'm curious too, when you're creating these songs, if you will, do you look for a melody or a catchphrase that you have to keep up no matter what with each bottle? Meaning that, okay, this is going to score great with the peat lovers, or this is going to score great. There's a certain element you have to get to in order to hook people.
Yeah, that hook, I think, is such a good analogy, actually. I think all of the
I copyrighted on the show.
I think that's so true. I think with it, when it comes to the hook and when it comes to our core range, we look at the malts especially, and it's like, each of those is an intensification of something you will find in Artist Blend or Glasgow Blend. So we have, take Artist Blend, for example. Artist Blend, 45% grain whiskey, and that softness and that silkiness, you can dial that up even further into Hedonism. You know, Hedonism is that characteristic within Artist Blend, but just taken to, you know, the next level. And it's the same, I think, there's a spice note that we've built into Artist Blend too. We use some of our custom French oak casks, very familiar for those who like the spice tree. These are basically old American oak barrels. We take the circular ends off. We attach new virgin toasted French oak, the insides of those.
That's really cool.
That brings just that little bit of extra interest to Artist Blend. But again, if you want to follow that, if you're like, oh, I really like that little hint of cinnamon, well, then you can go to Spice Tree and just have a ball. And so we know that Spice Tree needs to be spicy. We know that the Story of the Spaniard needs to have that juiciness and that sherry quality. And then obviously Peat Monster needs to be peaty. So all of that needs to be in there. For limited editions, it's a bit different. You're just trying to preserve the integrity and the character of whatever that great parcel is.
Well, that's really interesting. You know, I will say too, I think Mark's starting to get back there as well. I've always liked the stronger cast strength because you can play with the water and bring it down and it evolves as well. But I really appreciate what 43 ABV Sweet Spot has done for me lately. And the Artisan blend is perfect for that. Even this one, I just had another glass of the Hedonism. And I remember trying this about 2 years ago. And, you know, it was great then, but it wouldn't blow me away. I really appreciate the subtleties now more than I did before because I appreciate the lower ABVs into the delicateness of what I can get out of it now versus before I was like, I want more flavor, I want more power, and I don't need that anymore. I can kind of appreciate what's right there.
True. I'm the same. I think certainly throughout my university days, you know, there was I kind of looked at the ABV and it's like, oh, it's below that, I'm not really going to consider it. And I think it's a bit like people discounting blends altogether. You know, you're missing out potentially, and it's always your choice. You know, if you taste through whether it's our whiskey or anyone else who blends, and you think, well, this isn't for me, well, fair enough. But I always think it's worth trying. It's worth trying. It's worth seeing. Does this deliver flavor in the way that I want it? And Compass Box, the reason I've loved it for more than a decade is because whatever expression it is, whatever price point it is, I know I can get something that is really delicious and really interesting and really compelling and different. And we haven't got anywhere close to exploring all of the avenues of flavor that Scotch whiskey has to offer. And then you look at all of the world distilleries operating now and popping up like mushrooms. And it's just such an exciting thing to see. And where could we get to using this whiskey, which has been produced in a way that is illegal in Scotland, for example? So all sorts of things that we can access and we can bring together. And there's just so many opportunities to try things that are not really available in other parts of that marketplace.
It's exciting. Just the whole, I mean, I know we've been doing this for like 6+ years, and I know, you know, we're not new to this. It's been around for a long time, whiskey in general, but it feels like the last 3 or 4 years, it's just blown up, to your point about just all over the world. It doesn't matter where you go. It's just, there's some extraordinary whiskeys being created out there.
Right, maybe not just Scotch, but whiskey in general. There are some really incredible whiskeys out there, whether you're Taiwanese or Indian or Japanese. Heck, there's some great Irish ones. Across the board, whiskey is just doing great things.
Yep. So I do have one question. Next question from Everwind, one of our patrons. So in their blind effort, could the difference in fats and oils from the different single malts actually combine to form new flavors, or are they kind of just different flavors that kind of sit next to each other?
And is it predictable?
Yeah.
Really good question. So being non-chill filtered, we have all of those fats and oils within the whiskey. We're not taking those out in any way, shape or form. One thing that is worth saying is that these long chain fatty acids, which are creating that oily impression, they are long chain. So by their very nature, they are less volatile and they're not really going to give you a lot of flavor. But take them out and you have a very different experience. So there's a great wine book by Dr. Jamie Good, and it was published a couple of years ago. I can't currently remember the title of it. But in that, he talks about what actually constitutes a bottle of wine in terms of volatiles. And the ones that smell and the ones that actually have taste and flavor are maybe not the majority. But if you take away all of it's a bit like dark matter, I suppose. If you take away dark matter within the whiskey, within the wine, what have you got left? Everything else changes its relationship. So we don't know is the short answer, but it's such a fascinating thing to explore. If we took a slightly heavier, slightly meatier whiskey in place of what we currently use for a Glasgow blend, would that have an impact in terms of flavor? Would that be just a mouthfeel thing? It's something that we look at all the time as we bring things in and out. And it's like, well, I'm still getting the same flavor, but to the point about fats and oils, is this behaving slightly differently? So we don't know how the fats and oils relate to flavor explicitly, but as a blend, it's something that you have to bear in mind. And it's something that we try and keep within all of that recipe by not chill filtering as well.
Yeah, so there were several other questions from patrons that involved what water content do you blend at. So we've covered some of those questions. How long you marry it. We talked through some of those questions. So I did want to make sure the patrons heard that we kind of covered their topic, even though we didn't specifically address each person's question. So it's a great way to get their information out. And I want to make sure the patrons hear that
we're diving into a James Saxon bottle here, by the way.
Before we do this,
wait, yeah, there's a question.
There's a question that I want to hit. So Peat Monster for us was, guys, when was that? Like 4 years ago? When did we first discover
it was
Peat Monster?
exquisite, yeah.
It blew us away, right? And so since then, we've had a few bottles of course. We had a question from one of our patrons here live. Alejandro says, what prompted the recipe change in Peat Monster, asking since the original recipe was fantastic to begin with? Now, I'm curious too, because it's definitely a change. I don't remember the measurements, but I know one was, I can't even remember, but I know it's definitely a different flavor than what it was. What prompted that?
This was before my time, but it was something that has obviously been a big part of the Peat Monster's evolution. And the Peat Monster has continued to evolve. This is maybe one of our core whiskies which evolves the most. And it was actually John and the whiskey making team at the time, with Jill and with Elif, sort of diving into a glass of Peat Monster with the classic brown label and going, this really has become very elemental, very boisterous. We'd quite like to dial up the elegance a little bit more, like a little bit more cask structure, a little bit more generosity and sweetness on the palate, as well as all of that crash bang wallop smokiness. So we went away and we actually consulted the Soho Whiskey Club, a really great bunch of enthusiasts here in London. And Jill set up a range of tastings with them. I think there was 2 or 3 nights that she went, and she poured some of the best-selling Islay single malts, or at least single malts that were smoky, that sort of sold themselves on that smoke profile. And she had them score them blind. So we had data, raw data, to understand, okay, what spirit profiles do whiskey drinkers especially really enjoy in a smoky scotch? And then it was a case of, okay, so we want a little bit more elegance, because we both agreed that, I won't reveal which distilleries came out on top, but one of them is in the new whiskey. And it's like, okay, maybe it's a case of upping that elegance. And so we got hold of batches of whiskey from the Kalila distillery, which were approaching 12 years of age. And the Peat Monster up to that point was sort of hovering around about 7 or 8 years old on average. So we decided to bring the average age of the Peat Monster up. And this was such a dramatic change in the recipe that we felt it really was incumbent upon us to sort of signal that. And so that's why we went from the brown label to this painting label.
Yeah.
Fans of the Peat Monster will have seen this before in our 10th anniversary release. And obviously we've just customized it a little bit with the compass box banner, and we've taken the shape in a little different way.
Love the labels.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things about you guys, your labels, to be honest. I love it. It's amazing stuff. So we just transitioned from
the Peat Monster
to the Peat Monster
Arcana.
Now, this is your baby a little bit, right? Tell us what we're getting ready to try here.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought this, because this is one of my favorite compass box whiskeys, and I'm not just saying that because I was
the question from earlier. There you go.
I love Arcana because this was a chance to bring an experiment to light. So we take Peat Monster. Every year we create a new batch of the Peat Monster, and we marry those in casks basically until they're needed for bottling. So we bring in all the Kalila, all the Williamson that we need, our Highland malt blend. Back in those days, though, we were using some Leitchig from the Tobermory distillery and Ardmore as well. We bring them all together and we put them back into the original casks that the individual components were aging in. But in 2016 and 2017, we decided to refill the French oak casks. So the custom French oak casks, which would normally go into something like the Spice Tree, normally unpeated, we decided to put the Peat Monster back into that. So it spent anywhere between 2.5 and 3.5 years further maturing in these second fill custom French oak casks. So we only had 3 to play with, but their flavor was just so interesting. There was a slightly reduced smokiness. There was extra spice. And we thought, well, just 3 casks isn't going to go very far. But what if a blending challenge is to build on that influence? Take what's great about these experimental parcels and bring in distilleries or parcels of whiskey from other distilleries that will flesh out what is within that DNA. So that was my challenge as a whiskey maker. So that's why most of this is Talisker, oily, spicy Talisker.
Yes, it is oily. Yeah.
Oh, so oily. I love that, the way that really comes through.
Yeah.
And
We've never had this before, by the way.
This is the first time I've just tried it. As you're speaking, I'm like, yes.
Exciting.
Right.
I'm getting licorice on the nose. That was the first thing I smelled out.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Continue, please.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off. This is exciting.
No, I'm loving that you're tasting this through as I'm talking, because it's a whiskey that is, I think, the reason we gave it a different identity, we called it Arcana, secrets and mysteries. That's kind of what it's all about. Those who are maybe expecting the wallop of regular Peat Monster will be like, well, this is a subtler smoke, and that's entirely deliberate, because the way those French oak casks impacted upon that batch of Peat Monster was to reduce the smoke, increase the spice, increase the fruitiness. And there's a chocolate note there as well. But licorice, 100%. Yeah, I really do get that from especially the experimental parcel. And I think the Ardbeg that we added in there, together with the Milton Duff, the oily, tarry Ardbeg, together with that sort of really appley, sweet vanilla Milton Duff, just enhances that licorice note as well. But yeah, all of the whiskies that we put in there have been designed to just, I don't know, extract what was great about those 3 casks and then just expand upon their influence in different directions.
So there was a comment earlier from Zach Andrews I put on the screen. He says, the Arcana is simply amazing because the Milton Duff in the mid palate is phenomenal. So,
Yeah.
you were brought
This
forward
guy
that.
knows his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so
He does.
he's a patron and he knows his whiskey. He's definitely, but it kind of, when you mentioned the Milton Duff, I had to bring it back up. But this is definitely different than Peat Monster. And
completely.
So
It's a different whiskey.
yeah,
Well, we're all excited to talk about it. I want to make one point, and you can get onto it. I think we have this conversation, I swear, at least weekly with friends and families and people we meet is, people are getting into their journey of Scotch. A lot of times you find them, they're bourbon lovers that tried Scotch and they went right into the deeps, the delms, the Isla's peaty, smoky craziness. And they're like, nope, I'm out, Jerry. What I think is great about this is that this is to me, a really good segue into what a semi-smoky, peaty stuff can give you with the fruits and the chocolates and what really make a good blend of that kind of Isla dream, if you will.
Like dipping your toe in.
yeah.
Well, not dipping.
Sweet.
There's still a lot of smoke on that peat. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of subtleties going on.
I think there's
appreciate
a lot.
it. Yeah,
there's a good
really
mixture of stuff going on in this.
Good stuff.
Yeah,
Well done.
This is thank you very much. It's as good as the gold medal at the San Francisco Spirits Competition. That is, yeah.
Oh yeah, good for you.
Thumbs up.
Yeah,
I
and
like
so-
that because I've missed, obviously with everything that's been happened, I've really missed being able to get in front of people, pour a dram for them, and see their reaction. And even if it's positive or negative, just having that conversation. So yeah, thanks for having me on again and chatting through that. But yeah, Arcana, I think it splits people because at first, especially if you come from the Peat Monster, it's much more subtle, but the way it builds,
Yes.
you take a sip, you take another sip, and then I think the Ardbeg is just in the driving seat by the end. It's just super concentrated and rich. So I love that whiskey for its breadth as well as its intensity.
Yeah. So James, as you were describing this, I could see your passion for doing this. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your kind of philosophy on making whiskey and putting it together and kind of what your core design is, kind of how you run your formulation of new whiskeys predominantly, because admittedly doing core, you got guardrails you have to follow. But when you're creating your own on bottles? What's your philosophy on that?
Oh, I ultimately just want to create the most complete whiskey possible. And this comes back to our flexibility and what we are inherently designed to do as a company at Compass Box is create completeness. We're not confined to what one distillery can produce. And we're not confined to, whatever casks they could find to fill that spirit into, wait the 10 years or however long and then bottle it. We can draw, and we do, from over 40 distilleries in Scotland, from a variety of different ages as well, different cask types too. So my opportunity day to day is how can I make this whiskey better? What can I add in? How can I allow the great parcel, the compelling parcel that I talked about at the start? How can I let that shine? But how can I give it new facets, new layers? How can I make the most complete whiskey possible? And I find that when I am buying my own whiskey, I don't do it a lot because I'm making whiskey at Compass Box, which I love. And I find that I tend to go for the Compass Box portfolio more often than not, because these days there are so many ways you can go with whiskey. But I do believe that when you blend, when you create harmonies and textures and contrasts within the one bottle, that for me is more interesting. That is more compelling. That gets me drinking whiskey with much more excitement. So ultimately, it's just about completeness. How can I make this the most delicious whiskey possible?
So ask Tom's last question, because I know he's going to get shot down here, but we have to ask him for his perspective.
He really wants to know.
So ask James what he thinks about the General and see if there will be a new version of that blend. And his previous question was, can you source a bottle for him?
He really likes that bottle.
Tom, I'm still trying to source my own. The General was before I joined, so I was not able to take advantage of any staff bottles. Let's put it that way. It is a great whiskey, and it's a whiskey with a great story. And we try and make sure that all of our whiskeys have that story. But coming across those two parcels of very, very old blended Scotch whiskey, it was back in 2013, and the whiskey world was different back then, as we were talking about. There were fewer people, dialed into what Scotch whiskey especially could do, and it was just a lot easier to source these kind of whiskies. But less than 1,900 bottles, they all moved pretty quickly. And I think your best bet is like the rest of us, just keep searching the online auctions. They're out there, and I know a lot of them ship to the US depending on where you are. But unfortunately, I can't be of more help with the General, but I can give a little bit of hope about something interesting coming your way soon. We have managed to get hold of some old stocks, both of blended malt and of blended Scotch, and they are at the heart of a release that will be coming out next year. I can't say any more about that. There is.
We would love to do a partnership with you before you release it. Let us know.
Talk to Pete. We'll sort it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I had to plug that one in there.
Well, I was going to go in and put you on the hot seat, but before I do that, I was going to say, is there anything? What's on the horizon from Compass Box? So obviously, we're all coming out of post-COVID world, hopefully, and the sun is actually going to rise. But what can we get excited about with Compass Box? Obviously, we got some new labeling, but what kind of new whiskeys? What's in your forefront?
Yeah, there's always new stuff coming out for us, and we're really excited by what we would normally be releasing come the fall. A couple of really great, different, interesting limited releases. But before that, we will actually be adding to our core collection. So there will be another whiskey joining Story of the Spaniard, Spice Tree, and Peat Monster. So I can't go into too much more details, but let's just say it's getting government approval right now, so I'm sure the internet will be awash very, very soon. We're very excited to release that, and it's a really special one for us, special for me, but special for the company as well. Again, I can't go into too much detail as to why, but let's just say it's very in-house with how it's come together. So that's from a core range perspective. Those who like their peated whiskies, Andrew, you'll be right up here with this. We've got a third no name coming out. Come the late fall, early winter. And there's also a whiskey canvas, which is coming out too. and that's using some experimental orange wine casks. It's just delicious.
Wow.
Really good.
Interesting.
We're looking forward to seeing what folks like yourself and Compass Box fans in general, what they think of those two.
Awesome.
Exciting.
Sounds like fun.
Well, yeah, we got to get a hold of Pete and make sure we get a bottle of that.
I'm drooling already.
It's your man.
Yep.
You know, we've got a bottle here. I'm curious to know, what did you think about the original Spaniard?
Now that is a fascinating release, and I'll be honest, I've had that only once, and it was in a bar in St. Louis, Missouri, last year.
Oh, wow.
Really?
But yeah, it's a great balance of smokiness and sherry. So we did that for the Spaniard bar in New York. Very, very small run. So as you can see, it's a different label. We've got a particular look and feel when we do really small batch whiskeys like that. So we've done others for the US and some for Europe and different partners all around the world. But yeah, I believe, I don't have that recipe off the top of my head, but I think there's some Glenmorangie in there. I think there is a little bit of Kalila too. But yeah, it's really succulent, really juicy from what I remember, at least back in that St. Louis bar.
We've been delinquent. This was given to us by Mikey, who it was made for. He owns the Spaniard, and he told us that we had to open it, and we have not opened it yet. It was signed by John.
Moment.
We're waiting for the right moment to open this bottle with the right people, but I was just curious because you've been involved in making some of these bespoke bottlings. I think you were involved in the I can't pronounce it. I'm screwing this up. The Linus. There was a bottle that you made.
The Lioness, the bar in London.
Yes, the Lioness. The
Yeah.
Right.
So that was a really exciting project, and just crazy to think that bars couldn't open for the longest time. It was really, really tough. We've got so many great friends in the bar industry, and you know, big supporters of ours, and if we can support them with the t-shirt you're wearing, Mark, you know, kind of
buy one, everybody.
Yeah, if you go on our website, you know, in the US we've got a different supplier, in the UK and Europe we've got a different supplier. So we're trying to raise funds for the right hospitality charity that if we can find them locally, we'll support in any way that we can with the donations given by our fans, because we've been supported so well by the bar trade, and Ryan Chettier-Wardner has been a big supporter of ours and a great friend to John for a lot of years. And yeah, he wanted a whiskey which was an instant old fashioned. So that was an interesting brief. We went away, we looked at our stocks, and it's like, well, you garnish an old fashioned with some really nice orange peel, and we had some remnant stock of orangery, which we get requests all the time for orangery. It's not something we've made for a long time, but we had just enough of that to put into his bottling. And yeah, obviously a spirit drink, not technically a Scotch whiskey, but really delicious in the cocktails he was inventing and on its own. So I think that's all sold through now. Difficult to get hold of, but yeah, we worked on Lioness. There was a whiskey for La Maison de Whisky, their bar in Paris. We did another one for La Maison de Whisky with their La Maison Whisky Live Paris, which is a big festival that we would go to every year, and that was another casualty of 2020. Yeah, the bespoke projects are really, really interesting because you can go direct to people. You can have a conversation. You can get them to try it, give their feedback, and it's very iterative and very conversational, and you end up with something that, well, hopefully everyone is really delighted by. And I see you've got Delilah's in front of you, Drew, and that's not really a bespoke. We did work with Delilah's exactly for two of their releases, and Mike's
right. So this is the second one, and just so you know, Scotch for Dummies is very bespokeable. I just made up a word.
Is that another one? Bespokeable?
It should be. It should be.
We'll look for that Compass Box
Bespokeable.
Scotch for Dummies or Whiskey Tuber.
But to stick to our timeline and make sure that we don't keep you up too late, because you are 5 hours ahead of us, we want to take this opportunity to throw you on the hot seat. We're gonna ask you 5 questions. We don't want you to think too long and hard about them. They're not really whiskey industry involved, but this is more about everybody watching, getting to know James Saxon, the whiskey maker, and his personality and kind of what drove it, right, from a non-whiskey perspective. Yep. So if you're ready, James, or do we need to pour something a little more?
I'm gonna have some more of this. Actually,
I'm gonna do a little Arcana.
This is really good. This Arcana.
I've got my Glasgow blend. So.
All right. Well, we're going with a James Saxon blend right here. This is the Arcana.
Yep.
So,
All right.
Andrew, you want to start us off? Question 1.
What is your favorite movie?
You know, the only film that came into my head straight away was Rat Race. You know that one?
Well, that's where you. That's it. If it
That's
pops
your
in your
favorite
head,
movie?
That's it.
I love Rat Race. It's got everything. It's a gift of a movie. Just love it. Yeah.
All right.
very good.
So, what's your favorite place to travel?
Oh, I'm gonna have to say Japan. Like
Oh,
5 years ago, and it was one of those solo holidays. And when you get on the flight and you go, "Huh, have I done the right thing?" Just how unnavigable Tokyo is, and am I going to get lost? And am I never going to make it back? But that was a brilliant week. Saw some amazing bars, spent some great restaurants, and just such a great country. So I'd love to go back and do some more exploring there.
Interesting. Okay, good for you.
I'm going to skip and say, which house in Harry Potter would the Sorting Hat put you in?
Oh, I'm a Hufflepuff.
He didn't even think twice
That
about
took
it.
0 seconds to answer. I love it.
I think the Sorting Hat would probably go, you could be a Ravenclaw, but no, we're going to put you in Hufflepuff.
Really?
Oh, man, he knows his stuff.
Good for you.
All right. What is your escape or hobby? What do you do when you got to get away?
Oh, well, right now it's been so tough. Like cycling is one of my big go-tos. Between high school and university, I got on a push bike and I went to 42 distilleries in Scotland. So it took me 6 weeks.
Wow.
April and May 2010. An amazing experience. So a way to learn more about whiskey, but also a way to get really fit. Like there are some big hills in Scotland. But cycling always chills me out. But since moving down from Glasgow to London, I've joined a cricket club. And I love that. It's a great way of meeting new people.
Very cool.
A great way of getting some new bruises as well. Those things hurt. But yeah. I'm not thinking about anything else as long as I'm playing cricket.
I gotta know, did John allow you to expense that cycling trip, or?
This was definitely pre-Compass Box.
What's your mile?
Yeah. Sorry?
All right, so final question, pretty simple. It's more about a personality thing, but aisle seat or window seat?
Oh, I'm a window seat guy. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't have thought that, because, I mean, window seat people are more introverted, and you've done quite well for the past hour. You've been pretty sociable.
Yeah, no, it's all an act, guys. I'm gonna take a very long nap after this, but no, I like the window, the aisle seat, because I need to stretch my legs. Like I don't like to be in one place for too much.
Are you tall? Are you?
Yeah, I'm 6'2", so
yeah. I feel your pain when you said that. I'm like, I know exactly what he's saying. So.
Wow.
Well, listen, James, stick around for a second. We're going to end the show just a second. But, this bottle of Spaniard we have here, we're going to open up on a special date. And we would love for you to come to the States. And maybe we can open up with you on site sometime.
Oh,
it would be great to meet you in person.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love that.
We do plan on coming to see you in London. Honestly, we thought we were going to be there last year, and that stinking virus got in our way. So we are still going to take John's offer to visit in London up one day. We hope maybe next year, but we'd love to meet you in person. Really appreciate you giving us an hour of your time. I know our subscribers are really going to enjoy the replay, and we've really had good insight into you and Compass Box, as well as all your whiskeys. So I appreciate you. You want to wrap something?
I think it's been a great experience. I enjoy learning how the process of making whiskey and how your philosophy kind of works into that. One of the things you can tell about a person is when they're talking about their passion.
Right.
Oh, it comes through.
And you can see that as we talk to you. You just get animated, and I can tell, and that's great to see. Obviously, you're in the right profession, and it's good to see that.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Thank you, gents. Overall, it's been a really fun hour. Some great questions. And I'm going to have to use those hot seat questions on some other people. Just really fascinating insight into what makes it.
We have a lot of fun here.
We know a little bit more about you.
Yeah.
Well, James, we'll pull this one up and we'll salute to you.
Stay tuned. We'll put you in the green room for a second. Let's wrap this up.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Fantastic. Cheers, gents. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks.
3, 2, 1.